Welcome to the Fictionary Podcast, the show that helps you turn your words into bestsellers. I'm Shane Miller, Fictionary's Community and Customer Success Manager, and I'm here to help you structure stories readers can't resist. Enjoy the show. Hello, Fictionarians. Welcome to episode 3 of the Fictionary Podcast. Today's show is all about how to choose a character's name. But before we get into that, I've got a quick update about what's happening at Fictionary this week. As always, it's exciting times at Fictionary HQ. We are getting ready to release a brand new update to the Fictionary software, which will allow writers to construct their blurb and synopsis right within the Fictionary app. And this is going to be a game changer. I've had a sneak peek, obviously, at what's coming up, and it is fantastic. I don't like writing blurbs and synopsis as much as the next person, because condensing an 80,000 word novel into a few hundred words, and in the case of a blurb, maybe even less than that, is really, really tricky. But the new update to the software is going to make it so easy. So we can't wait to share that with you when it's ready. Right, that's it for the update this week. It's time for a word from one of our Fictionary community members, and then we'll get straight on to this week's topic. This week's Voices of the Fictionary Community quote comes from Rod Gilly. Now, Rod says, "I found real writers, those who take the craft seriously, and real editors who genuinely want to help the writers." And I'm so happy that you've noticed that, Rod. We really do want to help the writing community. That's why we offer so many free live events in the Fictionary community. That's why we're getting guest speakers in this year to really teach the writers and editors within our community. So thank you, Rod, not only for the testimonial, but for being an integral part of the Fictionary community. Right, with that said, let's get into all things how to name characters. What does a good character name do? Now, a good character name tells a whole story anytime you hear it. You know the type of name that I'm talking about: Jane Eyre, Randall Flagg, Moby Dick, Katniss Everdeen, Lando Calrissian. I mean, seriously, is there a more fun name to say than Lando Calrissian? And yes, I am a bit of a Star Wars nerd, but still. So how do you settle on a character name that's just right for your protagonist? Not to mention all the names you're going to need to come up with for those pesky side characters, villainous characters, and all the others. If you haven't been struck with that ever-elusive lightning bolt of inspiration for each of your character names, the following might help for landing on names that inspire you as you write and create a stronger presence for those characters in your reader's mind. Really, what we're looking for here are names that evoke a certain feeling. Character names can evoke strength or weakness. They can suggest a time period or elicit an immediate response from your audience. They may get a chuckle, or they might defy expectations. So if we think of a giant named Tiny, for example, that would defy expectations. They may indicate genre, so think of a cast of characters in your favorite fantasy or sci-fi novel, particularly. I mean, names within the fantasy genre can really indicate what the genre is. One example is Amberly Elizadel from Terry Brooks's Shannara series. Amberly Elizadel is not a common name, and the Elizadel points at something you would usually hear in a fantasy novel. But that's not all. There are other things that names can evoke. Obviously, nationality. There are some names that are more common in certain nationalities. You know, with British names, they sound a certain way. With Asian names, they sound a certain way. Names also can indicate social class and status. So one novel in particular that made me think of this is The Magician's Guild by Trudy Canavan. It is another fantasy novel, but it's a great example. So all of the magicians in that novel go by the title Lord and Lady. So, for example, one of the main magicians is Lord Rothan, whereas anyone who isn't a magician isn't bestowed with that title. The main character is called Sonia. She doesn't even have a second name. So that indicates that she is a lowborn or of lower social status. So the way you play with names in your novel can really help to indicate those types of things. And lastly, we've got personality. Unfairly or fairly, certain names get stereotyped into certain personality archetypes. Some examples in the thriller genre include like the surname Stone, for instance. A lot of thriller characters have that surname. One of my own characters in my urban fantasy thrillers have that surname. It evokes strength, and that's what you want for a thriller character, really. From an author's perspective, naming gives you power. When you name a character, you know them on a deeper level. You're more invested in them. You can almost feel them freeing themselves from your pages and accompanying you during your time away from the keyboard or notebook. I know the characters that I name that have strong names, they do tend to stick with me. My current protagonist is called Dean Crowthorne. I shared that name with a writer friend of mine and they really liked that Crowthorne surname. It's just unique enough to stick in the mind. If we look at naming from a reader's perspective, names provide access to the story, serving as the signifying container that houses all the character traits and story events and all the things that are related to that character. And of course, names differentiate one character from another. So if you're writing an epic literary novel or an epic fantasy novel, you might have a cast of, 40 characters. We need all those names to sound unique in order to differentiate each character. And this is because readers have limits on how much information they can process and retain. Now, you might ask, but isn't this a bit of a chicken and egg situation? Won't readers love, hate, or be indifferent to a name based on how well the author presents that character on the page? This is undoubtedly true to some extent. And you probably think of instances in your life when your impressions of a person on hearing their names changed after you met them and got to know them. But remember too, that writers are always, with every word, looking to keep their readers reading. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to engage our readers in our stories. So first impressions of every kind make a difference. Whether for first lines, first pages, first scenes, or first introduction to a character and their name, it's a large part of that introduction. Now, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't give you a quick word of caution where names are concerned. In addition to all the wonderful associations character names can convey to the reader, names can also trip up readers if not employed carefully. Names that are too similar, for example, will jar a reader from the reading experience if they struggle to understand which character is being referred to. This most often happens when characters have really similar sounding names. But that's not all. There can be cases where names have been duplicated. Often authors throw a name for a character who appears only once or twice in a story. This could be a random guard, for example, named Mary. Now, 100 pages later, the author needs a name for one of the wait staff at a big dinner scene. Oh, I know, Mary. That's a great name for these bit part characters. And this happens more than you might think. And even if a reader doesn't know where they've seen that name before, it will most likely register on a subconscious level and cause a little mental static or cognitive dissonance. And you shouldn't either feel compelled to name every minor character. This is a really good point. So if you name a character, whether they're major or minor, readers will automatically think that they're important and they'll remember that name subconsciously, even if they can't remember it in their conscious mind. So yeah, names are powerful things. Be very careful who you name and who you don't. Minor characters like taxi drivers, baristas, they don't necessarily need names unless they're integral to the plot, unless they appear in multiple scenes, and unless they're going to have a direct impact on your character's life, other than ferrying them from A to B or serving them a coffee. Overuse of names is another thing to watch out for. So you might have named all your characters perfectly, all the names sound different, but you're using the name a lot within prose or in dialogue. And in dialogue, this happens a lot. So an example of dialogue with an overuse of names would be, "Hi, Mary." "Hi, Jack." "How are you today, Mary?" "I'm fine, Jack. How are you?" Oh, I'm all right, Mary. Isn't this weather great? Yes, Jack, this weather is perfect. You know, that's that wasn't the best example of dialogue either, by the way. But the overuse of names in that dialogue is clearly shown. Think about conversations that you have in everyday life and how often you actually mention your conversation partner's name. You probably mention it once when you meet them, maybe a couple of times in the middle of a conversation, and maybe when you leave them as well. You might say bye and use their name. But we don't use people's names in every single sentence, and our characters shouldn't either because it sounds unnatural. And of course, we've got unclear pronouns. The opposite can be true as well. In an effort to not overuse characters' names because they know they shouldn't, authors tend to use a lot of pronouns. So he, she, they, for example. And while that's great, if we're using pronouns and not names, we need to make it absolutely clear who is speaking. So instead of using a pronoun, you might use a piece of body language specific to that character. You just need to think of ways to mix it up and mix your pronouns in so that your reader knows exactly who's talking. And I seem to be liking words of caution today. I've got another quick one for you. Authors change character names even into their late drafts, but beware of replace all when doing a find and replace. I have made this mistake myself, and it takes a long time to go back and fix, especially if you've saved your manuscript before reading it through again. Because if you do a replace all, it can result in really comical names. So for example, if you replace every instance of Chris in your manuscript with Bill and you're writing a Christmas novella, then you will end up with some funny names like Biltmas, with Chris being replaced by Bill in Christmas. So if you are changing names, make sure you go through one at a time and change them that way instead of doing a replace all, because it's not fun to fix, I can promise you that. Okay, so here are my 4 top tips for naming your characters. Name your characters with intention. This is the first one, and it might be really obvious, but I want you to think deeply about the names and associations that you're trying to evoke. And you might have to write out and live with the character for a bit before landing on a name. I remember when I wrote my first novel, it took me a good 4 or 5 tries to actually get a character name that I was comfortable with for my protagonist. And as for my side characters, their names were changing right up until the final proofread before I then sent to my editor. So names can change as you go through and as a character reveals more of their personality. The next thing you should do is assemble your cast. And this is a really good method for taking stock. Are any names too similar? How do the names play off against each other? How do first names and last names work together? Sometimes that can sound jarring. You know when you've got a right first name, last name combination for a character, you'll feel it. And are there subgroups of characters within your bigger cast? How do the names compare in a group? So if we're looking at a group of students at a university, for example, are all their names sufficiently different enough to make them unique? And listing all your character names in this way, like I said up top, it's a really good way to take stock and just make sure that all your character names are unique. If you're using the Fictionary software, then you will have your cast of characters list already in Fictionary when you import your manuscript. So when you import your manuscript into the Fictionary software, the software analyzes your manuscript and it pulls out anything that it thinks is a character name. Obviously, you might need to go through and tidy some of it up, but you will have a full list of your cast of characters so that you can easily analyze whether all your names sound unique enough, whether they convey the right purpose that you want for that character name. And it just makes it so much easier than having to cobble together a spreadsheet yourself or make innumerable lists of character names. I've done that before. That's not fun either. So yes, you can use the Fictionary software and it will do that for you. And not only that, but you can see which characters are mentioned in each scene. So if you don't want a character to appear as much, you can address that. If you know a certain character needs to appear more, you can address that too. You can see where you've named a character and where their first appearance is in your novel. So this is good for those times when you might have named a minor character like a taxi driver that you don't actually need to name. You can go back and take their name out and just have them as a mentioned character rather than a named one. The next thing I want you to do is ask questions. What would a blunt name say about your character? What would a more elaborate name say about your character? If you've got a character who needs to have undeniable power, what kind of name would that character have? If you have a character who is vulnerable, is there anything that you can put into their name to suggest that vulnerability? Remember, names have power and they convey personality if you use them correctly. And the last tip I have for you is to listen. So poetry, as we all know, combines sound and meaning. So listen to the name that you've chosen for a character, close your eyes. What's the first image that comes to mind? Does that name create a vivid picture of the character in your head? How does it sound when you say it out loud? How does it sound when someone else says it? If you've got a partner or friend who you're willing to bounce ideas off, do they like the sound of the name? Does it feel right when they say it? Because you'll know. I mean, there's certain characters that I hear their name and I think, oh, that's a brilliant name for that character. And yeah, you'll know, and so will the person that you're talking to about it. And the last instinct to listen to is, how does the name actually look on the page? Is it a name that's easy to read? And I know that in fantasy novels that's not the case, that a name is always easy to read, but those readers are used to those type of names. It's easy for your reader to read, and that's what I mean when I say easy. So another question that I get asked a lot is, where can you find names? Like, I've gone through my mental bank of names and I'm out. You know, I don't have any inspiration left in the tank. Years ago, the phone book was the go-to place for finding names. Today, the internet provides all manner of resources for finding names. You can search sites that aid with choosing baby names. I've used those a few times. Specifically for characters in different cultures. You can search African baby names, for instance, which I did for one of my characters. Try a name generator or search for popular names in your genre. So programs like Scrivener have a character name generator built in. And like I said, do a quick search for character name conventions plus your genre, and you'll find lists of names that you can adapt and use. Another thing you can do is think of names in your social circle or family. So as with naming a child, it can be a great honor for someone to have one of your characters named after them, but there's also the potential to offend if that character has less than desirable traits. What I would suggest, if you are planning to use someone's name, their first name, last name, or part of their name in your novel, run it by them, make sure they're okay with it, tell them what the character's like, maybe have them read excerpts of that character speaking, and just make sure they're happy for their name to be associated with that particular character. In my experience, most people are fine with this because they just think it's a great privilege to have a character named after them. And of course, on occasion, authors will hold contests to have a fan named as a character in their book. This can be a great way to get readers engaged. If you say, you know, enter this contest and you could be in with a chance of having a character named after you in my book. This generates a lot of buzz and it's really fun to do. What about nicknames though? Lovers of Russian literature know how effectively name variations can establish relationships amongst characters. Nicknames can serve a great purpose in showing how characters relate to one another, whether that suggests derision, friendship, or formality. Because don't forget, a nickname can be employed in either a good way. If you're best friends with someone, you might have a nickname for them, but it can also be employed in a bad way. If a minor antagonist detests your protagonist, they might come up with a nickname that infuriates them. And in fact, I was doing an edit on a client's book not so long ago, and they employed this technique for one of their minor antagonists. My advice with nicknames, though, is to use them intentionally and sparingly. What we don't want to happen is for readers to get confused about which character you're referring to. Nicknames often work best when they're employed by other characters in the story, usually within dialogue. Again, the main thing is not to confuse the reader, because what will happen is the reader begins to feel like an author has a lack of control over the story and that the author's unsure how to handle their characters. I'm going to round up now and leave you with this final thought. Character names will live on once they're out in the world, so authors do well to find names they're most happy with, that resonate most in their minds with their characters and with their readers. With a little luck, your next character name will have authors lamenting, I should have chosen that name for one of my characters. Somebody has said that to me before about one of mine, and that is one of the best feelings in the world. And like I said, you'll know when a character name feels right. Once again, it's time for my favorite part of the show. This is Question of the Week. And this week's question for you to answer is, what are your favorite and least favorite parts of the writing and or editing process, and why? I can't wait to read your answers. You can either leave a comment on the YouTube video or join the Fictionary community for free right now. Answer there and join the discussion with a bunch of talented writers and editors. And trust me, our community members are lively. So if you're looking for your writing family, look no further. You've found them in Fictionary. As always, the link to join the Fictionary community is down in the show notes. Did you know you can get a 14-day free trial of the Fictionary Storyteller software so you can see what all the fuss is about? Remember, Storyteller helps you identify the 38 Fictionary story elements in your novel and make sure you're utilizing them to full effect. And you'll also get a ton of visuals like your novel's story arc and your character's arc, which you just can't get anywhere else. To start your 14-day free trial now, go to fictionary.co/pricing. That's fictionary.co/pricing. I will leave that link in the show notes. Thank you for listening to the Fictionary podcast. If you enjoyed the show, hit subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcatcher. And don't forget to head over to the YouTube channel or join the Fictionary community for free today and answer the question of the week. Happy writing and editing, and we'll chat again next time.